God bless you all. Thank you. I must say I'm always wary of the standing ovation before I begin to speak. But that's very, very kind of you. You know, also when I'm speaking like this after dinner, I'm always reminded, this is many, many years ago, when I was in Chicago, we had a priest convocation. So like all 800 Chicago priests were gathered at this big resort. We had a cocktail hour and a half probably, followed by a dinner, so in a room bigger than this, 800 people. And it was a Midwestern sort of dinner. There was roast beef and gravy and, and then a key lime pie or something served for dessert. Well, the speaker that night was a great churchman, a Cardinal Carlo Martini. He's dead now, but he was the Cardinal of Milan and a very serious academic, very serious intellectual. And he'd been given the instruction to talk about hope and joy. Well, he took that to mean Gaudium et Spes, the famous Vatican II document. And typical European academic, he had a sheaf of papers, like 25 pages of text, which he proceeded to read to us in a very droning, heavy accent. Well, after about 20 minutes, I would say half the Chicago Presbyterate was actively snoring during the talk. So dear Cardinal Martini got through it. But then the next morning, the MC, who was kind of a wag, got up and he said, well, that was a dry martini. So whenever I speak like this after dinner, I pray I'm not a dry martini. And I do promise, they have a clock here, so I promise to be kind of short tonight. I know you've heard a lot of talks today. We're also eager to hear our comedians. So just going to share a couple of simple thoughts with you folks. The topic of my talk is why we evangelize. Why do we bother? Why do we evangelize? Here's the first reason, is to get people out of hell. Now, I say that in the full eschatological sense of helping people avoid eternal damnation. That's true. The saving of souls is the purpose of evangelization. But I want to focus it a bit because as all of us sinners in this room know, hell begins here, just as heaven begins here, right? We get a taste of heaven in the best moments of life here, and we all know what it means to live in hell. And part of the purpose of evangelization is to help people get out of that condition. You know, the Buddhists talk about the first noble truth is all life is suffering. And it doesn't mean that every single moment of your life is misery, but it's close to our doctrine of original sin, that we have a tendency to get caught in certain addictive and destructive patterns that condition the whole of our life. Look at the imagery used for hell, by the way. It's very interesting. Go back to Jesus himself, Gehenna. Gehenna being a kind of a garbage dump not far from Jerusalem, where there was a permanent fire, a bit like a tire fire, we would say. You know, people were burning the trash and the refuse, and the fire never went out. Well, it's a great image, fellow sinners, am I right? It's a great image for these addictive and self-destructive patterns that we get into that are like a fire always being kicked up within us. You know, Dante, by the way, used the opposite image. It wasn't fire for him, but ice. That's good too. Sin that gets us stuck in place. We can't move. We can't reach out to others. And Satan, in Dante's Divine Comedy, buried up to his waist in ice, and then he beats his great angel wings. He's a fallen angel. But now they're like bat wings. And all they succeed in doing is making the world around him colder. That's a beautiful image, everybody, of what sin does to us. It takes the very best in us, what's meant to be angelic in us, and as we exercise it, but caught in these addictive patterns, it just makes the world around us colder. Well, part of the purpose of evangelization is to get us out of hell. It has a saving purpose. Our word save, it comes from a Latin word salus, meaning health. But if you were greeting someone in ancient Rome, you would have said salve to them. It meant good health to you. Well, salve is, salve Regina, S-A-L-V-E, salve. And our word salve is the closest relation to it in English. Health, health. Part of the purpose of evangelization is to bring healing to people, to show them a way out of the desert, out of the fire, out of the ice, whatever metaphor you want to use. Jesus said, I've come that you might have life and have it to the full. Well, see, we agents of evangelization are meant to be bearers of life, helping people find a way out of hell. Okay, what's hell? I'm going to provide this definition to you. Hell is the suffering caused by false praise. Now, there's my whole talk in a way, so just get that in your memory banks. Hell is the suffering caused by false praise. Now, what do I mean? St. Augustine reminded us long ago, we're built for God, right? We're wired for God. We have an infinite longing in our hearts. Only God can satisfy it. Therefore, when I hook that longing onto anything less than God, I'm unsatisfied. I've always loved the imagery from St. John of the Cross. He's the greatest of the spiritual writers in our tradition. And John of the Cross said we have these infinite caverns in us. That's the longing for God that only the infinite God can satisfy. But what do? John of the Cross said. We spend most of our lives throwing things into those caverns, hoping they'll be filled up. So we take the goods of the world, which really are goods, but they're not meant to satisfy our infinite hunger, and we throw them down this infinite cavern. What's the result? We get frustrated, and then in short order we become addicted. And you see exactly why. Because now I'm trying to make myself happy. And what did Thomas Aquinas remind us? The big four things we seek in place of God: wealth and power, pleasure and honor. Now think about it. Again, fellow sinners, all of us end up to varying degrees worshiping some version or combination of those four things. We make them the highest value. We take wealth or pleasure, power or honor, and then we throw them into these infinite caverns. And they're not filled up because they can't be filled up. And then we panic, right? We panic. I guess the reason I'm not happy is I don't have enough wealth. I don't have enough pleasure. I don't have enough power, enough honor. So I strive and strive and strive to fill up the infinite cavern, and it doesn't work. And now a very deep fear sets in. I strive and strive and strive. I'm now caught in this self-destructive and addictive pattern. As I exercise my spiritual powers, all I'm doing is making the world around me colder. The very best biblical image, I think, for this is from the Elijah cycle of stories. So I talked about one of them tonight in the homily. But the other great one, of course, is the Elijah and the priests of Baal on the top of Mount Carmel, remember? He tells the priests of Baal, sure, build your altars to your gods. You cry out. We'll see what happens. Then I'll build an altar to God, and let's see who wins. And so the priests of Baal, honoring false gods, that's always the problem, false worship. They build the altars, and they pray, and they chant, and they cajole, and they beg, and nothing happens. See, that's decisively important, everybody. That's a spiritual lesson of crucial significance, because the fire will never fall when we're worshiping false gods. It just won't. It's not meant to. And so they panic, and they hop around the altars with greater insistence. And Elijah mocks them, you remember? I don't know, maybe they're gods, or maybe they're asleep, or they're on vacation. I don't know where they are. And beautiful, by the way. That's beautiful spiritual leadership. We should do more of it, by the way. You know, we often get bullied by the secular society. No. Let's reverse some of that bullying. I mean, we're the ones who should name the pain of the secular society. It's the same one. It's the same one. The gods you're worshiping, wealth, pleasure, honor, and power, they'll never satisfy you because they can't. So Elijah mocks them. At which point we hear they begin to slash themselves, remember? Until the blood flows, and still no fire fell. I love that image. It's so good. And in some cases, it becomes literally true for people who cut themselves, right? But it's an image for the self-destructive quality of bad praise, the addictive, self-destructive quality that makes us miserable, makes us sad. What saves us? What salves us? Right praise. And so Elijah erecting the altar to Yahweh and then giving right praise to the true God, the fire falls. Well, that's the way it works. It still works that way. Getting people out of hell is getting them out of that terrible addictive tendency to hop around the altars of the priests of Baal. Does that make sense? And every sinner that we come across is to some degree in that position. To evangelize is to move them out of it. You know, the great New Testament version of this is the woman at the well. What does Jesus say to her? You come to this well every day, and you drink, and you get thirsty again. St. Augustine said the well is indicative of what he called concupiscent desire. It's just what I'm talking about. It's errant desire. Worshiping of false gods. It's wealth, it's power, it's pleasure, it's honor. We come to that well every day and we drink, but we get thirsty again. What does Jesus say to her? I want to give you water bubbling up in you to eternal life. I want to hook you on to the worship of the true God. That's evangelization. Here's St. Thomas Aquinas. Where do we see this on full display? In the Beatitudes. Is wealth your problem? And a lot of us, sinners are addicted to wealth, and we're caught in that self-destructive pattern. So what does Jesus say? Oh, how blessed are the poor in spirit. How blessed you are if you're not addicted to wealth. Is pleasure your problem? How blessed are you if you mourn? What a weird thing to say, right? How blessed you are if you mourn. But interpret it this way. How blessed you are if you're not addicted to pleasure. Is power your hang-up? Then how blessed are the meek? I don't know any culture that would ever say to people how blessed you are if you're powerless and meek. But you see what he means. Don't be addicted to power. Don't hop around that altar. Maybe honor is your poison. Oh, therefore how blessed you are when people hate you and they persecute you and they prescribe your name as hated because of the Son of Man. Good. How lucky you are if you're not addicted to the approval of others. Those 4 addictions overcome, what do we hear? How blessed are the merciful. What's mercy? That's what God is. So the merciful are those who have hooked themselves onto the praise of the true God. Oh, how blessed are the single-hearted. My life isn't divided among the goods of the world. It's single-hearted. It's focused on God alone. How blessed are the peacemakers. When you're addicted to one of these worldly goods, you're caught in the self-destructive pattern. You make the world around you colder. When you're hooked on to worship of the true God, when you've been saved, you've been healed, then you become a healer, a life giver, and a peacemaker. You want to be happy, beatitudo, right? And everybody in this room wants to be happy. That's the formula. Get rid of the 4 addictions. Hook yourself onto right praise. To evangelize is to draw people into that space. A little more Thomas Aquinas for you. Where do you see the Beatitudes fully exemplified? In the cross of Jesus. The great St. Thomas said, you want to be happy? Love what Jesus loved on the cross and despise what Jesus despised on the cross. You'll be happy. That's a really interesting little formula. Throw out Oprah books and all those self-help. They won't help you. This will help you. And I mean, take it to the bank. What did Jesus despise on the cross? Well, what's his relationship to wealth? How wealthy is he on the cross? He's got nothing. What's his relationship to pleasure on the cross? At the limit of physical and psychological and even spiritual suffering. God, my God, why have you abandoned me? How much power does he have on the cross? None. He can't even move. How much honor does he have? As they mock him and they spit at him. He's detached from the 4 classic addictions. He's not worshiping at those altars, but rather what? Love what Jesus loved on the cross, which is doing the will of his Father. Do you see now why, everybody, from that cross flows healing and salvation? Do you see now why the blood and water flowing from his side is a blood and water that heals us? It's also why St. Paul said, the only thing I know is Christ and him crucified. That's all I'm going to talk about. I want to hold up Christ crucified because that's the source of healing to us. Just as the serpent, the bronze serpent lifted up in the desert in the time of Moses, brought healing to those who were bitten by the serpents, so the image of Christ crucified heals. And of course, we just celebrated this. What is Christ crucified but the image of right praise, right? That's why we gather at Mass, to give right praise to the Father. To evangelize everybody is to get people out of hell. And the way out of hell is that cross of Jesus. Okay? Let me give you a reason, too, why we evangelize. To let people know who their Lord is. We evangelize to let people know who their Lord is. So, indeed, it gets us out of hell. There's a healing element within evangelization. But see, God is not satisfied that we're simply healed. That's a first step. I mean, of course, he wants us to get over whatever these blocks and addictions and hang-ups are. But then, once we're healed, he wants us on mission. He wants to send us. Remember when the prophet Isaiah is called, and the angel brings the coal, the burning coal to his lips. That's the purifying process. And then almost immediately Isaiah says, well, here I am, send me. I'm ready to go. Peter, falls at the knees of Jesus. Lord, leave me, I'm a sinful man. There's the moment of admission of sin and purgation. But then immediately, no, from now on you'll be a fisher of men. I've got a mission for you. Another way to put this, which army are you fighting in? So you've been healed by the evangelizing word, but now you're ready for mission. You're ready to fight in the right army. Those who've got a Jesuit formation, anyone in this room, or been on Jesuit retreats, and you come to that famous meditation, remember in the exercises, of the two standards. Ignatius invites us to imagine this great field, and you've got two armies, the army of Satan and the army of Christ. And the banners of both are flying, and you've got a decision to make. Satan will make you field marshal of his army, right? I mean, he'll offer you anything. Christ might make you the digger of latrines in his army. But the point is, you got to choose which army you're fighting in. Everybody, some things I find as you get older become more complicated, but other things become simpler as you get older. This to me is one of them. There is a stark either or in life. My musical hero, Bob Dylan, put it, right, in his song, you got to serve somebody. It might be the devil or it might be the Lord, but you have to serve somebody. It's dead right. And notice, please, the language of service. Oh, I don't serve anybody. I'm my own person. Oh, come on. Everybody is worshiping somebody or something, right? There's a highest value for everybody. It might be, again, wealth. It might be power. It might be your reputation. It might be your career. It might be your country, any of those things. But everybody's serving somebody. And you've got to decide, is it God or something other than God? And everything else will flow from that decision. Evangelized people know who their Lord is and whom it is that they serve. Bob Dylan's song goes right back to the book of Joshua. Remember at the end of the book of Joshua, the Israelites have conquered the promised land where their people are worshiping false gods. Joshua says bluntly to them, all right, time for a decision. You can worship the gods of the peoples here, but for me and my family, we'll worship the Lord. Bracing, clear, unambiguous. Yep, and we all got to face it. You got to serve somebody. Who is it? Evangelized people know who their Lord is and in which army they're going to fight. The spiritual writer, Father Ron Rolheiser, he's a Oblate of Mary Immaculate. Cardinal George was a friend of his. He once said, it stayed in my mind, he said, there are two types of people in the world. There are people that suck the air out of the room and people that breathe life into a room. And I think that's right. You see why, and look, we're all sinners in this room, but why people will suck the air out of the room? Because they're caught in addictive patterns, right? If you say that my life's all about wealth, well then the people in the room is just, they can help me get wealthier. My life's all about power. Well, the people here will just be a means to that end. My life's all about honor. Well then, look, there's all these people that might honor me. So my whole stance is now to draw life out of the room. But those who are free, those who've been salved by the cross of Jesus, they're able now to breathe life into a room. See? Beautiful. So which army are you in? Are you in the army of those who suck the air out of the room, or the army of those who breathe life into the room? That's a decision. Evangelize people know who their Lord is. Those who saw the Catholicism series might remember this, but I did a kind of commentary on the Christmas story, which culminates in an army appearing. Remember, it's the story of two emperors, because it begins by invoking Caesar Augustus, the great emperor of the world, doing a typically imperial thing, calling for a census of the whole world so he could better control it. Talk about sucking the air out of a room, right? But because of that, this little nobody couple make their way from one dusty outpost to another. But the story isn't about Caesar, it's about them. And the baby that the mother gives birth to is the true king. Caesar, well-fed, well-protected, in the best house in the world, could satisfy all his desires with the snap of a finger. And then this baby king, in the manger, no place to lay his head, wrapped up in swaddling clothes, surrounded not by courtiers, but by shepherds who were considered lowlifes. But see, here is the climax of that story. When at the end an angel appears, and of course, what's the reaction inevitably to an angel in the Bible? Inevitably is fear, right? This reality from another dimensional system appears before me. And then we hear a whole army of angels appear. And don't get romantic about that or think of Christmas cards. That's meant to be an overwhelming image, an army of angels. But they're not on the side of Caesar. They're on the side of the baby king. He's the one with the biggest army. He's the one with the true power. Which army will you fight in? Some descendant of Caesar's army? They're all over the place today. They're thick on the ground, aren't they? Or are you going to fight in the baby's army? That's the decision. Look now at the Gospels under this rubric. John Courtney Murray, the great Jesuit theologian, said, the Gospels should be read as the story of an ever-increasing agon. That's the Greek term, struggle or fight. Agony comes from that, agon. Read the Gospel of John. Look at the way each chapter ends. You know what it begins to sound like? An episode of The Sopranos or The Godfather. And they plotted to destroy him, and they spoke against him, and they arranged to kill him, and they read it as the story of this increasingly intense struggle between two armies, if you want. And where does that come to its full expression? We just held this reality before our eyes a few minutes ago on the cross. See, what's the cross, everybody? Read the passion narratives of cruelty and hatred and stupidity and blindness and institutional injustice and all the negativity of the world produced by unsaved people, produced by people in hell, people who are caught in these addictive, self-destructive patterns. All the characters that bring Jesus to the cross are meant to exemplify that. And think of the cross itself as a beautiful symbol of the fallen world and all of its power. It's what Rome used to terrify its enemies. And by God, it did terrify Rome's enemies for centuries. It's like the emblem of the fallen world. It's the emblem of hell, the cross. And on that cross, Jesus enters into the ultimate agon, or struggle, where his vision of life, his way of being in the world comes up against the negativity of the world. And by all accounts, on Good Friday, by all accounts, Caesar again has won. That's the drama of that day. We're meant to see, here's this wonderful figure, this great Christ, this Messiah, but he's done in by the power of the world. But then Easter Sunday shows that the love of God and the power of God is greater than anything that is in the world. Jesus went all the way down. He went all the way to the depth of our dysfunction, but then demonstrated that God's love is more powerful than any of the dysfunction of the world. Demonstrated that what was displayed on Christmas is in fact the case, that the angelic army is more powerful than Caesar's army. See, and that's why when you read the Gospels, they're filled with this kind of marvelously militaristic language. What I mean is, even this word that's at the heart of our program, evangelion, evangelism comes from that, evangelization. Well, angelos, right, means messenger. Eu means good. So evangelion is good news. But this is what they did in the ancient world when an emperor or a general won a battle, is they would send ahead of them evangelists, euangeloi, right? Bearers of good news, to say, hey, everybody, Caesar won. Caesar's generals have won another battle. You see how edgy, wonderfully edgy these first Christians were when they said, no, we got the real evangelion. Has nothing to do with Caesar, but rather with God's victory over Caesar, God's victory over sin and death and all of their power. And so the point of a St. Paul as he evangelized was to say, you've got a new Lord, you folks. It's no longer Caesar. You know, I've shared that before, that it was kind of a watchword of the ancient world. You'd say, Kaiser Kyrios. Caesar's the Lord. You even greet people. Kaiser Kyrios. It's a bit like Heil Hitler, you know, back in the 1930s. Kaiser Kyrios. Caesar's the Lord. But as St. Paul says, and it's exactly why he ended up in jail so often. Paul says over and over again, Jesus Kyrios. And we think it's a nice, spiritual talk. Jesus is the Lord. That was a very edgy, revolutionary thing to say in the first century. Because it meant, no, Caesar is not the king. Jesus is the king. You're not meant to march finally in Caesar's army. You're meant to march in Jesus' army. It may be the devil, it may be the Lord, but you got to serve somebody. And don't play this autonomy game. No one really is like that. We're all serving somebody. Evangelized people have heard the evangelion that Jesus, having gone to the limits of God-forsakenness, has emerged as the victor. And so now it's time, healed people, to march in his army. That's what evangelization is about. Knowing who your Lord is, whose army you belong to. Okay, one last little move, and I'm going to stop. I've got 5 bottles of water down here. I thought I would really get wound up. Let me just close with this. I just came across this recently. Dorothy Day is someone I've admired for a long time, the founder of the Catholic Worker Movement, now under consideration very seriously for canonization. Dorothy Day, way back in the 30s and 40s and 50s, so before the council, was arguing against a distinction that was common at the time, namely between what we call a commandment spirituality meant for the laity and a council's spirituality meant for bishops, priests, nuns, and religious. Now, what this means is, for the laity, they should follow the 10 commandments, which means, you do the basics. You don't kill people, you don't steal, you don't commit adultery, you don't lie, the basics. And that's for the laity. God bless them, that's what they can handle, And then a council of spirituality, the evangelical counsels of poverty, chastity, and obedience, well, that's for the athletes. That's for the spiritual heroes. The bishops, priests, nuns, religious, and monks, right? And so they're living at a higher pitch. Well, Dorothy Day, of course, who was a laywoman, thought this was crazy. She said, no, all the baptized are called to the full level of holiness. In this, she anticipated the teaching of Vatican II, which famously teaches the universal call to holiness, and overcame the distinction between a mere commandment spirituality and a council spirituality. She said, look, the clergy and religious do live them in a different way, but every baptized person is called to be committed to poverty, chastity, and obedience. And see, I think it gives us a very good idea of what evangelized people look like. So I'm just do it real quickly with you. First of all, poverty. Again, the clergy and monks and so on will live this in a distinctive way. That's true. But see, take the first part of my talk. What's it all about being saved? It's about finding detachment from these things that make us crazy, the things that we falsely worship, that get us caught in addictive patterns. To be poor means to be spiritually detached from these things. Asceticism. How often do we even talk about asceticism for all the baptized? Well, that's if you're addicted to pleasure. How about letting go of power? Power is your hang-up. Can you willingly let it go and even run to the other extreme, abandon your own power, give it to somebody else? Honor. Maybe you're addicted to honor. Can you be detached from it to the extent that you'll even accept the lowest place, the least honored place? And then maybe, folks, where the rubber most meets the road, when it comes to wealth. A lot of us are addicted to wealth. We think that will make us happy and secure. The church says a lot about wealth, though, doesn't it? How about this from Pope Leo XIII? This is from Rerum Novarum, the great first encyclical in the social teaching tradition. And let this sink in. This is not directed just to priests and monks and nuns. He says, when the demands of necessity and propriety have been met, everything else you own belongs to the poor. I'm going to read that again. This is what we call the universal destination of goods. That's from Thomas Aquinas too. Listen, when the demands of necessity and propriety have been met in your life, so your needs are being met and you're living a proper, whatever that means. It's left, I think, intentionally a bit vague. But once the demands of necessity and propriety have been met, everything else you own belongs to the poor. Wow. I mean, every single time I come across that, it bothers me. It should. It's good that it does. What would happen, our country is made up of about 25% Catholic. What if tomorrow all the Catholics in our country decided they're going to live this way? Well, the whole country would change, wouldn't it? It's what evangelized people look like, people who are freed from their attachments and know which army they're fighting in. They know who their Lord is. How about chastity? Well, what's chastity? It doesn't belong uniquely to monks and nuns and priests. No, chastity means sexual uprightness, right? It means living your sexual life in a morally upright manner. That's chastity. Well, of course everyone's called to chastity. Everybody is. What's the great teaching of the church? That sexuality belongs within the context of marriage with the great ends of unity and procreation in mind. Now, why do we teach that? Because we're Puritans and we're hung up on sex. No. The thing is, Catholic guilt and Catholic laws and all that, we surround precious things with laws. That's the basic principle, isn't it? If I'm out in some field and there's a rock lying there, I don't say, may I pick that up? May I take that home? Yeah, of course you can. Who cares? No one cares about that rock. But you walk into the Louvre in Paris, may I go up and just add a few strokes of paint to that? Well, no, the Louvre, I used to go to the Louvre all the time when I was a student in Paris, and it's surrounded by laws. It's surrounded by restrictions. So is Wrigley Field in Chicago, by the way. I mean, anything we consider precious, we surround with law. So don't cave into the culture's nonsense about that. Oh, the Catholics are puritanical. We don't have a puritanical view of sex. We have a caritative view of sex. It's kind of a half-made-up word, but from caritas. The idea is to bring the whole of your life under the aegis of love. What's love? Caritas. It's willing the good of the other. Why unity and procreation within marriage? Because it renders caritative our sexuality. It directs sexuality according to the demands of love. That's what it's about. And to live chastely is to live precisely that way. We Catholics are meant to be shining stars in the culture that show the way. You know, let me give you two quotes from Humanae Vitae, St. Paul VI, great 1968 document. Start reading it sometime at paragraph 19. It's when St. Paul begins playing the prophet. And he's talking not about the particularities of contraception so much, but as what might happen down the pike if we go down this road. Listen to this one. Let us consider how easily this course of action, so the opening toward contraception, could open wide the way for marital infidelity and a general lowering of moral standards. Not much experience is needed to be fully aware of human weakness and to understand that human beings, especially the young, need incentives to keep the moral law. And it is an evil thing to make it easy for them to break that law. I don't know about you, but that sounds pretty prophetic to me. Does anybody think that we're not living in a culture that's marked by an awful lot of sexual chaos? Well, I mean, it's an essential part of life, not the whole of life, but it's an essential part of life. If it's not disciplined according to caritas, it's not directed according to love, then we have this breakdown in marriage, which means a breakdown in the basic unit of society, which means a breakdown in the culture as a whole. Paul VI is naming this. How about this one? Now, think of this after Harvey Weinstein. Listen to this. Another effect that gives cause for alarm is that a man who grows accustomed to the use of contraceptive methods may forget the reverence due to a woman and, disregarding her physical and emotional equilibrium, reduce her to being a mere instrument for the satisfaction of his own desires, no longer considering her as his partner whom he should surround with care and affection. Now, I'm going to bracket the particular issue of contraception, but just to see what Paul VI prophesied. It struck me in the wake of the Harvey Weinstein thing and the Me Too movement, and people quite rightly calling for the respect for women, decrying the way that this man and so many others had treated women. Listen, reducing her to being a mere instrument for the satisfaction of his own desires, no longer considering her as his partner whom he should surround with care and affection. This has been the teaching of the church forever. I mean, we're the ones who've been saying this to the wider culture forever, and we get pilloried all the time for being hung up and puritanical. And he saw it in 1968. It's a lot of the laity, if you want, not living chastely. What would happen if tomorrow 1/4 of our country began to live in radical chastity? Do you ever look at the pornography problem in our country? Now a multi-billion-dollar industry. Most of it made, by the way, in my archdiocese. If you look at the LA, that's where most of the pornography in the country comes from. What would happen if 1/4 of us overnight began to live chastely? Last one now, I promise I'll stop then. So poverty for all of us, every baptized person. Chastity. Last one, obedience. When I was ordained in 1986, I put my hands like this in the hands of Joseph Bernardine, who ordained me. And I said, I promise obedience to you and your successors. At the time, I barely knew Bernardine. I mean, he was just the cardinal and had no idea who his successor would be. But I was in that moment surrendering my career, right? When you say I'm going to promise obedience, it means I give up planning my life. I'm not going to plot the course. I'm going to listen to my superiors, trusting that they embody the voice of the Holy Spirit. And that's why I've tried to live my life that way as a cleric, as someone who's promised obedience. When I became rector of the seminary, this is some years ago, I'd been named maybe a month, and there's a big fundraiser. And there were a lot of very wealthy people in the room. And the cardinal was there too, and he had his red cape on and the cassock and everything. Well, up to me comes this lady in high dudgeon, and she said, Father Barron, this is the most ridiculous appointment I've ever heard of. You being made rector of that seminary, you've got a ministry to evangelize, to use the media, and now you're pushing papers out at that little seminary in the country. This makes no sense. It's a terrible use of your time and ability. And I said to her, there's a little man in a red cape in the next room who can answer all your questions. But that was the beauty of it. That's obedience. I'm not plotting I didn't plan this. I didn't desire it. It was given to me. Okay. But for all of us, even those not under that kind of clerical authority, what does it mean to be obedient? It means your life is not about you. One of the most basic intuitions of the spiritual life, that your life is not about you. I've used that language a lot from Balthazar. It's not the ego drama, right? That's my program. It's my plans. I'm the director. I'm the producer. I'm the star. No. That's boring. Bore me to death with the ego drama. It's the theodrama that matters. What God wants for you. What God's designed. He's the producer. He's the director of it. He's got a role for you. It might not be a starring role, at least in your eyes. To be obedient is to say, I'm not living the ego drama. I'm living the theodrama. Did you see, I saw this movie called The Shape of Water a couple years ago about the lady who falls in love with the fish. You remember that? Well, I watched the movie unfold, and the minute it ended, I turned to the friend with me and I said, that's going to win the Academy Award for Best Picture. And I was right. And the reason I said it checks every box, but I said especially the title of the movie, see? What does the shape of water mean? Well, water has no shape, except the shape that we choose to give it, right? Water is just utterly fluid. It's whatever you want it to be. That's the voice of our culture today. Moral norms, moral values, the integrity of human action, all of that is bracketed in favor of a completely autonomous self-creation. This culture of self-creation, everybody, is really dangerous. It's like saying, to a kid that wants to learn baseball, just play any way you want. Golf, just swing the club any way you want. Just make it up as you go along. No, the fun of it is to submit yourself to the rules, the objectivity, the integrity of the game, so that those rules get into you and then make you into a baseball player or into a golfer. The same is true in the moral order. It's a submission to, an obedience. Obeidere just means to listen to the objective normativity of moral value. And that's what brings us to life, not the shape of water that I just give whatever form I want to give to it. Bore me to death again with that. That's the old tired ego drama. The theodrama is being attentive to these great objective normativities that make me come alive. See, and that's obedience, everybody. That's the obedience that every evangelized person ought to demonstrate. Okay, so 2 reasons to evangelize. Get people out of hell. We've all been there because we're all sinners. You all know people right now who in a very particular way are probably in hell. Why do you evangelize? To hold up the cross of Jesus, to show them the path out of that. But then once they're out of hell, to teach them and tell them what story they belong to, whom they serve, which army they ought to fight in. And then the way to do it is by living poverty, chastity, and obedience. I think that's why, everybody, we evangelize. God bless you. Thanks for listening. Thank you very much. Thanks.